Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Vishnu Pad Paramamsa Parvajikacharya Asto Tarasati Shishimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Vishnu Pad Paramamsa Parvajikacharya Asto Tarasati Shishimad. Shringa Guru Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Premse Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. New Dwarka Dham Ki Jai. Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Rukmini Dwarkadish Ki Jai. Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Shrimati Subhadra Ki Jai. Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Gaurnitai Ki Jai. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Jai. Harinam Sankirtan Jaga Ki Jai. Transcendental Prasadam Distribution Ki Jai. Gaura Premananda Hari Hari Bo. All glorious Tolasama devotees Hare Krishna. All glorious Tolasama devotees Hare Krishna. All glorious Tolasama devotees Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Glorious Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the third canto, chapter 14. We're going to read texts 15 and 16. I'll read 15 and then we could chant 16 together. This chapter is entitled Pregnancy of Diti in the Evening. And today's special word today is Kashmalam, which means contaminated. So Srimad Bhagavatam is so wonderful. It helps us rise above the beastly tendencies and to try to advance in spiritual life. And it helps us rise above these subtleties of material nature, that we see between man and woman and the material energy. So I'll chant this verse. Atame kuru kalyanam kamam kamala lochana artopasarpanam bhuman amogham hi mahiyasi. This is the translation and purport for this particular text. O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. So there's one sentence purport here. Diti knew well that her request might be rejected because of the untimely situation. But she pleaded that when there is an emergency or a distressful condition, there is no consideration of time or situation. So today's verse. Iti tambira marichaha kripanam bahu bashinim pratyahanu nayan vacha pravidhananga kashmalam iti tambira marichaha Kripanam bahubashinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravidhananga kashmalam Iti tambira marichaha Kripanam bahubashinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravidhananga kashmalam Tamaya Banicham Iti tamvira marichaha Kripanam bahubashinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravidhanunanga kashmalam. Vaishnavis. Iti tamvira marichaha Kripanam bahubashinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravidhananga kashmalam. Iti tamvira marichaha Kripanam bahubashinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pradivamangalamasmalam. Iti. Thus, tam, unto her, vira, O hero, Marichaha, the son of Marichi Kashyapa. Kripanam, unto the poor, Bahubashinim, too talkative. Pratyaha replied, Anunayan, pacifying, Vacha, by words, Pravidha, highly agitated, Ananga, lust, Kashmalam, contaminated. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. O hero Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Please repeat. O hero Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Purport. When a man or woman is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it is to be understood as sinful contamination. Kashyapa was engaged in spiritual activities, but he did not have sufficient strength to refuse his wife, who was thus afflicted. He could have refused her with strong words, expressing impossibility, but he was not as spiritually strong as Vidura. Vidura is addressed here as a hero because no one is stronger in self-control than a devotee of the Lord. It appears that Kashyapa was already inclined to have sexual enjoyment with his wife. But because he was not a strong man, he tried to dissuade her only with pacifying words. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gnananjana Salakaya Chakshushoonmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamupakadamayam Didati Swapadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vanchakalpa Trubhischa Kripasindhyogacha Patitam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So the translations again. O Lotus Side One, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. So this is, O hero Vidura, Diti being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. So this is Maitreya, I guess, talking to Vidura there. So I like this summary that's given by Gauranga Darshan Prabhu in his Bhagavat Subodhini. So it just kind of gives us a little summary of the chapter, and this is where we're out in texts 15 and 16. It's where Diti approaches Kashyapa for union in the evening, and she's saying how a great person shouldn't neglect the distressed. And then that's from 8 to 15, and then 16 to 21, you can see there, Kashyapa glorifies his wife. And then in our verse, it's like Maitreya is telling Vidura that you're the hero because Diti is afflicted by this contamination of lust, and therefore she became poor and talkative and was pacified by the son of Marichi. So just kind of to give you like a flashback, we just heard of Vrahadev Zanali in Hiranyakashipu. And then Vidura inquired about the history of this demon. And so Maitreya is explaining how Hiranyaksha and his brother were born. So Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, was a Prajapati, and his task was to populate the universe. In fact, he's practically the father of all living beings and entities. So it's amazing, because he had 13 wives, and he impregnated them, and they all had different kinds of species. So it's described. So at this time, Diti insisted to have sexual union, even though it was astrologically inauspicious. But unable to dissuade her, Kashyapa acquiesced, which is an acquiesced? Okay, we got 3 different. So yeah, it's a new word for me. Actually, it's an interesting word, and it pretty much depicts exactly Kashyapa Muni, how he acquiesced. Acquiesced, okay. It means to accept something reluctantly, but without protest, which is perfect in this particular situation of Kashyapa Muni. So, yeah, learn a new word here. So he warned that there will be 2 deadly offsprings, which we know is Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. And they'll create mayhem in the universe, and they'll terrorize all the innocent and saintly people. But actually there's going to be a silver lining. First, their death will be executed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then secondly, Hiranyakashipu's son, Prahlad, is going to emerge as the crest jewel of the devotees. And his incredible devotion will deliver his entire family. So that's very, very nicely described there. So I'd like to talk about the poor and talkative. So poor, it says diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative. So there's an interesting verse. It says, Daridyo daso guna rasi nasi. I found this in the 10th canto in the purport of Srila Prabhupada. This is when Lord blesses Sudama Brahmana. He was very poor. And this is the translation to that particular stanza. The discrepancy of being poor ruins heaps of good qualities. But it's not only in the poor. Actually, criminality is among the rich and the poor alike. And both of them can become purified by chanting. But there's one advantage of the poverty, is that saintly people can enter their house very easily. You see, and therefore they get his association and they get purified and liberated. But whereas a rich man's house, you can't even enter, there's a sign that says, beware of dog. Or now you see some places says, protected by Smith & Wesson. That's like, is that the name of the gun? Smith & Wesson, something like that. So that's described there. But in the third canto, Prabhupada says, you're poor if you're not Krishna conscious. And then Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, they saw people were very poor because they didn't know the aim of life or the means for achieving it. So one is actually poor who is poor in transcendental knowledge, you see. But we have to tolerate. Prabhupada says material poverty and wealth, it comes and goes. So we just have to tolerate. You know, tam stitikshva bharta. So even if we have enough money, you'll still be unhappy if you're poor in transcendental knowledge. Therefore, transcendental knowledge is real wealth. So Prabhupada says in the Dharma, the way of transcendence, where it's entitled, yes to Krishna, no to illusion. So there's another interesting sloka in the 5th verse of the 15th chapter. Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha. And this refers to one who's completely freed from the puffed up condition of the material possessiveness. So a person may be materially very rich, opulent, very respectable, but if he wants to transfer himself to the spiritual kingdom, back home, back to Godhead, then he has to become freed from this puffed up material condition of possessiveness, because it's a false position. It's moha. So moha is used because it means false understanding, that one is either rich or poor. In this material world, the conception that one is very rich or very poor is the consciousness in connection with material existence. And that's false. Because the body's false, or temporary. And the pure soul, who is prepared to be freed from this material entanglement, must first of all be free from this association of the three modes of material nature. So our consciousness at the present moment is polluted because of association with the three modes of material nature. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita, this verse says, Jita Sangha Dosha. One has to be freed from this contamination of these three modes of material nature. So we have to, as Srimad Bhagavatam, it's trying to help us prepare to go back to the spiritual world. So in this particular chapter, Prabhupada says, we have to seek for the association of such devotees. For this reason, we have begun the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So we see that the problem is that there's pollution in the atmosphere, pollution in our consciousness, pollution by association. But the worst association is the mind, because the agitations of the mind are manifested in the tongue, and therefore, like Diti, you become very talkative, like that, and poor. So there's this nice prayer by the Avanti Brahmana in the 11th canto, and he sings a song, and it's renowned as the Bhikshu Gita. And just to kind of summarize, he's saying that there's neither mortal persons, demigods, the soul, the ruling planets, the reactions of work nor time are the causes of one's happiness or distress. But he said, rather the mind alone is their cause, because it is the mind that makes the spirit soul wander in the cycle of birth and death. And the real purpose of all charity, religiosity, and so forth is to bring the mind under control. So this is the essence of all spiritual prescriptions for spiritual advancement. And so we see that sometimes devotees, they actually become freed from the contamination of this material association, and they're not affected by material miseries. Is the sound okay? Okay, sorry. So even though they may appear in the material world, they're not afflicted by the miseries of the material world. And Prabhupada gives a very good analogy or a good example. And he says, just like the activities of the cat, you see, the cat carries her kitten in her mouth, but when she kills a rat, she also carries the booty in her mouth. So they're both being carried by the mouth of the cat, but they're different conditions. So the kitten feels comfort in the mouth of the mother, whereas the rat is carried in the mouth of the cat, feels the blows of death. So similarly, those who are sadhava or devotees engaged in Krishna consciousness in the transcendental service of Krishna, then they don't feel the contamination of the material miseries. Whereas those who are not devotees in Krishna consciousness, they actually feel the miseries of material existence. So we should give up the association of materialistic persons and associate with devotees. So we see the Buddhists, why do they practice this manuvrat? It's to increase the gravity and the contemplation of the mind and avoid this material blabbering. Say no to the lower tendencies. And we have many examples in the Shastra of men and women of character that we can follow. There's an interesting sloka that says, speak quickly, otherwise keep silent, right? Or in the Islam religion, they say, speak a good word or remain silent. And I even remember my mom, she would say, if you don't have anything good to say, then just keep quiet, right? So this phrase, speak quickly, otherwise keep silent, means that if you have something important to say, then you should say quickly before the opportunity is lost. Otherwise, it's better to remain silent. So it's better to speak up at the right time instead of missing the chance to express yourself. So the devotees have that time. So we see here, there's a nice verse relates to that in our tradition, the vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam. So a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So Prabhupada mentions how the first, we must control the tongue, the speaking power. And he said everyone has this power of speech, and as soon as we get an opportunity, we begin to speak. But if we don't speak about Krishna consciousness, then we speak all kinds of nonsense. And he uses the analogy like a toad in the field, he's croaking. And so everyone has a tongue and they want to speak, even if he doesn't have anything to say, if it's just nonsense. But that croaking of the toad, what does it do? It simply invites the snake of death. Please come here, eat me. You see, so keep on talking like that. And Prabhupada compares them to the impersonalists and the Mayavadi philosophers, which is very interesting. All nonsense. So this, there's a very interesting verse in the 5th canto, and it goes like this: Vayam pramatasya vaneshvapi shad. So it says, even if one goes to the forest, goes from forest to forest, One who is not self-controlled must always fear material bondage because he is living with 6 co-wives, the mind and the knowledge-acquiring senses. Even householder life, however, cannot harm a self-satisfied, learned man who has conquered his senses. So we see here, Lord Brahma in this particular verse is speaking. He's indicated that going to the forest with uncontrolled senses, instead of going to the forest with uncontrolled senses, he said it's better and more secure to engage your senses in the service of the Lord. And even household life, it can't do harm to one who's self-controlled. It can't force you into material bondage. So then there's a nice quote from Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur. He quotes this interesting verse. Durdantendriya kala sarpa patali protkata damstrayate. The sense organs are certainly our greatest enemies, and they are therefore compared to venomous serpents. However, a venomous serpent is bereft of its poison fangs. It is no longer fearful. Similarly, if the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, there is no need to fear their activities. The devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement move within this material world, but because their senses are fully engaged in the service of the Lord, they're always aloof from the material world. They're always living in a transcendental position. So this is the condition. So we're talking about talkative. We could see when one becomes mad. Like Bharta Maharaj, he became very talkative when he couldn't find the deer. And we see in the 5th canto, if Bharta Maharaj couldn't see the deer, his mind would become very agitated. And he would become like a miser who, having obtained riches, had lost them, and then becoming very, very happy. So this is how he felt when he couldn't find the deer. And he became illusioned and began to speak like a madman. So there's many verses that even says right in the translation, and speaking like a madman, speaking like a crazy man, like that. So this is how it was described. So, because he could only think of the deer and how it could be protected from all inauspiciousness. So he considered himself very unfortunate because of the animal's absence and because of his strong affection. And he was calling the deer, like his prince, my prince. You see, so this is moha, illusion. So he was addressing the animal as if it was his own son because of his affection. So we can see this deep attachment. And then Bharta Maharaj was considering his meditation false because when he was meditating, he was actually thinking of the deer and enjoying the deer, bumping up against him with his little horns, So he felt that was very nice. So after speaking like a madman in so many different ways, he began to forget about his spiritual life, and he became mad. And it was interesting, he saw the moon shine, and Maharaj began still speaking like a crazy person. He was saying that, he said, this is the actual verse, "The dear son was so submissive and dear to me that due to its separation, I'm feeling separation from my own son. Due to the burning fever of this separation, I'm suffering as if inflamed by a forest fire. My heart, which is like the lily of the land, is now burning. Seeing me so distressed, the moon is certainly splashing its shining nectar upon me, just as a friend throws water on another friend who has a high fever. In this way, the moon is bringing me happiness." So here he's thought that he was so agreed with separation that the so-called sun, the deer, is thought that the moon was splashing gargled water on him. Because in Ayurveda, it's described that, someone has a fever, you have a friend gargle some water in his mouth, and then he pour it on the person's head, and he gets free from the fever. So that's very interesting. So anyway, it's proven here that whatever happened in the beginning, there's like another gold lining. Let us prove that due to the grace of the Supreme Lord, a devotee is never vanquished. Due to his willful neglect of devotional service, a devotee may be punished for a short time, but he again revives his devotional service and he can go back home, back to Godhead. So this is the power of devotional service. So Kashyapa Muni was a very powerful person. He was actually the grandson of Lord Brahma. As it mentioned in the verse, he was the son of Marichi, who was actually born from the mind of Lord Brahma. And so I mentioned he was the father of all species of life. But we see everybody's weak in front of material nature. There's that verse, Daivihe Shagunamai, Mama Maya Duraya. So this divine energy of Krishna is very, consistent of these three modes. It's very difficult to overcome. But Mameva Ye Prapajate, if we surrender to Krishna, then we can easily cross beyond it. So we see this is Krishna in the background. So it's interesting, I was reading ahead there and showing that all his different wives, they were giving birth to aquatics and ferocious animals like tigers and lions took birth from one of his wives named Timi and Shrama. So he had their different names. And then one of his wives gave birth to a buffalo, cow, animals with hooves took birth, eagles, vultures, other large birds of prey, and even angels took birth. And then some of the sons of one of them were serpents, as well as other serpents and mosquitoes. So they're all born from these wombs of his different wives. And then even Rakshasas, bad spirits, were also born. The Gandharvas, animals with hooves that were not split, those are the horses. And then there's one wife who gave birth to 61 sons. And it's described that 18 of those are very important. 18 of those sons were very important. And it goes on to describe about that, but we'll just go on here. There's a nice verse from the 6th canto. Vilokyai Kanta Bhutani, Bhutani Ado Prajapati, Striyam Chakre Swa Dehardam, Yaya Pumsam Matir Rita. So this is a translation. In the beginning of creation, Lord Brahma, the father of the living entities of the universe, saw that all the living entities were unattached. To increase the population, he then created woman from the better half of man's body. For a woman's behavior carries away a man's mind. So this is showing why the universe, he needed to populate the universe, so this is how he did it. So this is the entire universe is going on under the spell of sexual attachment, which was created by Lord Brahma to increase the population of the entire universe. So this is interesting. So this is Diti replying to her husband. This is an interesting pastime. In the 6th canto, again, Diti approaches her husband and she says that, I've lost my sons, and if you want to give me a benediction, can you give me an immortal son that can kill Indra? And because he had pleased her and had offered her a benediction, he had to agree. So she said, Indra, it's because of Indra that, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha were killed because, he came to help please Indra. So Kashyapa heard this plea and he agreed. He was agreed because he had to agree. So now he has to face the danger of killing Indra. So he thought, he says, now I've become too attached to material enjoyment. Taking advantage of this, my mind has been attracted by the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of a woman, my wife. Therefore I am surely wretched person who will glide down towards hell. So he thought very intelligently, so I need to adopt a means that follows her nature, therefore she will not be blamed, But he's not blaming her, he's blaming himself. because he's a man, he should have better sense and more control of his senses. But anyway, he came up with a very interesting plot that I'll engage her in devotional service, and then maybe she'll become purified, and the sons maybe will become devotees. So this is what happened. So he made this promise. So he said, okay, but you have to do this, you have to follow my instructions and follow this vow for at least 1 year. And then you'll surely be able to get a son that will kill Indra. But if you deviate from this vow, then actually your sons will be favorable to Indra. So this is what happened. So she agreed and she said, yes, yes, I'll do whatever you want. And then Indra actually heard about this and he became a servant of Diti. And he was just looking for some fault so that he could, enter into the womb. And he came into the womb and he tried to kill the son of Diti with his thunderbolt. So this is what happened, because Indra, Diti thought Indra is so much fond of sense gratification, he killed my 2 sons. Therefore he's cruel-hearted and sinful. So then I need to kill him, somehow or another. I need to get revenge. So, yeah. So this is what happened. So Indra, Diti was thinking that Indra thinks his body is eternal, but there I'm going to show him and adapt a means. So this is what happened. So finding fault, Indra, with his mystic powers, he actually entered into Diti's womb while she was unconscious. Because what happened is she fell asleep without washing her mouth and feet, I think, in the twilight. So therefore he entered her womb and he tried to cut to pieces her embryo. So he cut into 7 pieces, and then he saw different living beings entering into these different bodies. And he started cutting each of them again and again. And they actually all became separate entities. So what happened, it was one, and then it became into many, many different species. Different entities. So what happened is that these devotees, these sons, they actually were pleading with Indra, said, why are you trying to kill us? We're your follower. We're your devotees. So then he said, okay, if you are, my favorable to me, then he left with them too, and he called them the Maruts. They went to the heavenly planets with him. So this is what happened, the purification. So anyway, the talkative illusion in its climax is with this pastime we see here, in that we see Chitraketu's lamentation, also in the 6th canto, and talking about he was so much aggrieved about his son going away, and he was just saying a lot of mad things. We don't have time to go into them, but he was saying, also talking like a crazy man. And so what happened is that the great sages had to come, Angira and Narada, and they explained the relationship between the father and the son is not factual, and it's simply a representation of the illusory energy. So that there's some more to talk about that, but we don't have time there. And then we mentioned in the verse about, O hero, Vidura. And here he spoke up against Duryodhana. And he was telling his brother, Dhritarashtra, that you're maintaining offense personified. So you should actually, get rid of him. But anyway, Duryodhana offended him. And he didn't get angry. He just left. And he said, oh, this is Krishna's mercy. It's an opportunity to go and take shelter of the holy places, which is Krishna. So therefore he is stronger. What devotee is considered to be a hero. Whereas Kashyapa Muni, he was a very powerful personality, but yet he was an impersonalist. So therefore he was not as strong as a devotee. And then we have many examples. Puruva, who was very much attached to Urvasi, he performed sacrifices in order to attain her. And we see how Ajamil, an innocent son of a Brahmana, saw a Sudra pair, embracing, and then he fell. But he also was actually relieved in the end because he was saved by the Lord. And many examples. We see Vishwamitra Muni and Menaka. He fell down and they had a child named Shakuntala. And Sabari Muni just saw 2 fish and he fell down and married 50 wives. But we see Haridas Thakur. Maya Devi herself came and he was a devotee of Krishna and he didn't succumb. So that's very, very nicely described there. So also in spiritual life, you can become very talkative. We see the devotees, the gopis. They became very talkative. Actually, they were glorifying madly Krishna. And this is the madness of Krishna that we want. So in Krishna consciousness, there's a lot of talk. We can do a lot of glorification of Krishna. And so we're just at almost the end here. So the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this Kali Yuga is especially meant to deliver the fallen souls who are always planning something for their enjoyment. And he gave people in this age the advantage of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra so that we can become freely pure from all this contamination. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu belongs to the spiritual world, and his methods for propagating the Sankirtan movement are also imported from the spiritual world. So we know Srila Narottam Das Thakur saying, Goloka Premadana Harinama Sankirtan, that this is Sankirtan movement has nothing to do with this material world. It's imported from Goloka Vrindavan. So this is the advantage we have. So we see, we come to Krishna consciousness to get a higher taste, not sense gratification. So we have to become serious in Krishna consciousness or we will suffer and the movement will suffer. So we have to choose between the 2 boats, pleasure and principle. And there's a very nice thing that Bhakti True Swami said one time that stuck with me. He said, in the future, ISKCON will take care of everyone. But now, it's still like a young tree. You know, the fruits are growing. So he quoted this, he liked this thing that President Kennedy said in his famous speech. But he said, don't ask what ISKCON can do for you. Ask what you can do for ISKCON. So this is what we seen yesterday. So many people were doing something for ISKCON. They help support this Krishna consciousness movement. So I'd just like to say some quotes Prabhupada said about the Krishna consciousness movement. This is how we'll end. So he said the Krishna consciousness movement is so beneficial that it can very easily counteract the contamination of material nature, which results from one's possessing a material body. And he's talking about how we have to transfer ourselves to the spiritual kingdom and get free from these modes, right? So he said, for this reason, we have begun the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And he says, the devotees of the Krishna Consciousness movement move within this material world, but because their senses are fully engaged in the service of the Lord, they're always aloof from the material world. They're always living in a transcendental position. And then Prabhupada says, sometimes our Krishna consciousness movement is criticized for mingling men and women, but Krishna consciousness is meant for everyone, whether one is a man or a woman. Doesn't matter. Lord Krishna personally says, Striyo Vaishyas tata Sudras tepi yanti param gatim. Whether one is a woman, Sudra or Vaishya, not to speak of it being a Brahmana or Kshatriya, everyone is fit to return home back to Godhead. So we have to strictly follow the instructions of the spiritual master, and therefore we can, he says here, we therefore request all the members of the Krishna consciousness movement, both men and women, not to be attracted by bodily features, but only to be attracted by Krishna. Then everything will be all right. Otherwise, there will be danger. And then we quoted this already. Those who are sadhava, or devotees engaged in Krishna consciousness, in the transcendental service of the Lord, do not feel the contamination of material miseries. Whereas those who are not devotees of Krishna consciousness actually feel the miseries of material existence. One should therefore give up the association of materialistic persons and seek the association of persons engaged in Krishna consciousness. And by such association, we will benefit in spiritual advancement by their words and instructions. We will be able to cut off his attachment to material existence. So I want to thank you and thank all the devotees, especially our great devotee from Mayapur Dham to give us his association and help to engage in Krishna consciousness and spread the Krishna consciousness movement. So, any other comments, questions, realizations? All right. Well, thank you then again for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Ki Jai.